This session is called a just transition. And before I start, I just want to share something that someone, I think, about a year ago shared with me. It's something called the butterfly effect. And they told me that simply small actions can have very many changes on a complex scale. Meaning that the flapping of wings of the butterfly can cause a tornado in another part of the world. It's called the butterfly effect. And I'm happy to share this with you. I'm happy to be a moderator on this panel. My name is Davis Sekamwa. I work with Rise Up Movement and Third Foundation, and I work with a large number of people, activists at a grassroots level. And the goal of this event, this panel, is we want to understand what do we mean by climate finance, what are the barriers of climate finance, how can we position ourselves as developing countries, what are the different approaches that have been taken to achieve climate finance from all angles to the faith angle. So this is why we are holding this event and this panel. So you can invite your friends to take part in this. You can invite other people that you know will benefit from this to come and be ready to learn something new. And without taking more time, I'd love to invite the panelists up to the stage. And I'll start with Carola Mejia. You are very welcome. Carola Mejia is a Bolivian economist and a finance analyst at Latindad. So that means she's good with numbers and everything that comes with finance. And then second, I'll invite Timaro Simon. Timaro Simon is an activist, but not only that, he's an engineer. And he comes from Tanzania. We are glad to have you here. Despite your ordeal at the airport, you had some challenges at the airport where almost you missed to attend for, but I'm glad that you're here, Simon. And then I'd like to invite Tibian Osman. You are very welcome. Tibian works with the Climate Emergency Collaboration Group, and she handled a multi-million-dollar project on clean energy at Aga Khan. So we are very honored to have you here. And I'll also have Lowell Bliss. Thank you very much for coming. He is the director of Eden Vigil Institute for Environmental Leadership and the co-director for the Christian Climate Observers Program. And I'm glad to be moderating this panel with you. I believe that we are going to have a wonderful time. And I look eager to it. And maybe before we start, I'd just love to ask, I'd love to ask anyone here in the audience, what do they know about climate finance? Just briefly. What do they know about climate finance? Anyone? Anyone? Okay. All right, no worries. So I believe at the end of the panel, we are going to be able to answer that question. And without taking so much time, I'll start with Carola Mejia in no particular order. We understand that climate finance has been a very big discussion, not only at this scope, but at previous scopes. And we know that climate finance is needed to carry out different projects that are related to adaptation, that are related to mitigation as well. But they cannot be successful without receiving that finance. And beginning this panel, I just want us to understand how can developing countries, how can they position themselves, how can they leverage on the existing international climate finance that can support the just transition in their communities.
Thank you very much, Davis, for the invitation. I'm very happy to be here. And thank you to the audience for joining us. I'm from Bolivia, Latin America. I've been working in climate finance for a long time now. And I am representing Latindad here. And we have a very critical vision of climate finance and how is it working right now. Climate finance is the money committed for mitigation and adaptation under this convention. And in 2009, rich countries recognizing they have like a differentiated responsibility, committed to mobilize $100 billion annually by 2020 to our countries. We are in 2023, they haven't reached that goal. Now we know that the needs are huge, are trillions, almost $6 trillion, and that real goal hasn't been met yet. We know that climate finance is very important to move to this transition, and as you were mentioning, not only for energy transition, but also to transit to a new development model with resilience, where we can adapt to all this new reality we're living. And unfortunately, climate finance, as it is right now, is creating a little bit of problems, because most of it is very focused on mitigation. Only 27% is going to adaptation, which is should be a priority for our countries because of what we are living. It is very difficult to access these funds. And can you believe, and I want to ask all the people that's here, how many years do you think it takes for a project to be approved by the Green Climate Fund? How many do you think? Yes, it takes 5 years. Can you believe the emergency is now, and we have this bureaucratic and inefficient climate finance architecture that is really making it very difficult to access the funds? And most of these funds get to the governments and not to the communities, and that is a problem that we have been demanding and highlighting in this kind of international forums, because we need direct access. We need direct access for the people that is suffering in the front lines, because sometimes governments don't know how to take that money to good projects or to really invest in the communities at the local level. So that is another problem. The other problem we see, and we have been working a lot, and I'm glad to see people from Debt for Climate here also, is their issue of debt. You know, climate finance should be helping us, but most than two-thirds of climate finance is coming to our countries as loans that we have to repay. In Latin America, we are receiving 81% of these climate finance as loans, and they are not really like super concessional with good interest rates. It is very expensive loans, because the higher your climate vulnerability, the higher the interest rate they charge you. So it's a very unfair and neocolonial system that we are trying to confront, and we are demanding a reform in this international financial system and in this climate finance architecture that is not really responding. And right now there are 60 countries that are suffering from a debt crisis. Most of them are in the south, of course, and most of them are really vulnerable to climate change. One is my country. In Latin America we have 10. I'm sure in Africa there are a lot of countries with debt problems. So we really need different solutions, and to really guarantee a just transition, we need different approaches. We need, and we are discussing here, and we are demanding the historical polluter countries to fulfill their commitments, to give us more public grants. They say there is not enough public money for the climate emergency. They want to move everything to the private sector, to the MDBs. And we know the money is there, the public money is there, but unfortunately it's going to the war, it's going to the fossil fuel subsidies. We can see clearly in this CAP how the fossil fuel industry is really doing business. And it really is very frustrating. And we also want climate finance that not add to the debt burden of our countries. We want it to be accessible, especially for the communities that need it most. And I want to make something clear about just transition. We know all the world has to transitate or change, to move to a different model of development with low emissions, but we are not really high polluters. Latin America as a region only contributes 11%, and I'm sure Africa contributes very little to the global emissions, CO2 emissions. But we are highly vulnerable to its effects, and we are disproportionately suffering from the impacts of the climate crisis. So that's something that we need to understand. The energy transition in our country should be more progressive. We need a lot of funding, but this should not be accelerating our debt problems or increasing our debt problems. And we also demand a just transition that represent that the energy transition that is being done in the north should not deepen extractivism in our countries, because that's something that is happening. Unfortunately, big levels of debt and our governments, and I come from a country that depends on gas exports. for creating income. So having big debts and climate finance adding to this the burden makes our countries to keep investing in hydrocarbons, in mining, and agribusiness, in protected areas like the Amazon, which is a very important region that we have, natural region, that's displacing communities, indigenous communities that live and defend their nature there. They are suffering from pollution of the air, of the water, that is delaying our transition because our governments cannot really fulfill their national determined contributions, their transition objectives because of this. And that is really making a big problem of this. So we demand also to consider, and that is something not considered here, debt relief, debt cancellation for countries that are really in high indebtedness. We also want and demand, and Latindad is doing a lot of work and effort on this, new instruments, for example, new emissions of special drawing rights, which have been very useful in the pandemic because this is like an emergency instrument that gives money to all the countries, unfortunately very unfairly distributed because it's according to the IMF. But it doesn't create debt, it is unconditional, so the countries can really use it where they really have wanted more. And to give you the figure that was approved for the pandemic, it was $650 billion, $600 billion, $650 billion. So that's more than the goal that they couldn't reach. It was just a political decision that they have to take in the IMF board. So we are pushing for that, and we are pushing for climate finance that does not create debt, that is accessible, that is fast and efficient, and that responds to the needs for the people that is most affected and vulnerable.
Thank you very much. I actually didn't know that it takes 5 years to give a green light to a project. I actually didn't know that. And I think 5 years is a lot of time. And I also agree with you that there must be changes in the system, such as debt cancellation. I don't know if there's any country whose debt has been cancelled in the global south. I don't think so. Maybe the audience can educate us, but I don't think so. And thank you for that. Thank you for that. I'll take the conversation to Laura, please. You want to? Okay, no problem. Okay. Then I'll move on, no particular order. I'll move to Tibian Osman. She is the campaign manager at CECG, and I believe that this is a space that you're working in. And I'll briefly ask what different innovative forms of financing can be used to make progress for the just transition, especially for developing communities that are having a hard time to access this source of funds. And if there are any challenges, as she has explained, that come with this financing, what best way can we be able to solve these challenges?
Hi everyone, can you all hear me properly? Great. So yes, just to reintroduce myself, my name is Tibian Usman and I am a program manager at the Climate Emergency Collaboration Group, which is essentially a philanthropic re-grantor and convener. And what that means is that we are essentially working with some of the world's largest climate philanthropies to think about how we can essentially address this question of how is funding, particularly from philanthropy, going to the communities and the people that need it the most. And I think just to complement what we've just heard from, debt and the public finance piece, I think my answer here is going to focus a little bit more on the role of philanthropy and how we see ourselves sort of tapping into the ways of innovative finance, but also making sure it's really getting to the places where we need to see it the most. I think for me, it comes down to two elements. One is about trust-based funding. And I think this is something that we have not seen in the public finance, and that's why essentially it takes 7 years to get something, 5 to 7 years to get something as simple as a renewable energy project agreed upon in wider communities and wider infrastructure. Trust-based philanthropy and trust-based funding for me is a big part of the solution, because what it means is, and I think this is what's needed in this world of climate action and climate advocacy, is that we need to be hearing from people at the front line what they need and how they need it. And essentially, I think if any of you have, I've worked in the development for a very long time, and the approach there is essentially, these are your problems and these are the solutions we're going to bring for your problems, and it hasn't worked, and that's why we're still in this situation. So it's sort of rechecking our approach to that, thinking about, what are your problems, what are your solutions, and how can we support? And just to contextualize things a little bit, we've heard some great figures there, but there's 3.5 billion people in this planet that now live in areas that are vulnerable to climate impacts. That's almost half of humanity, 3.5 billion people. Of those, 1 billion people don't have access to energy. So when we talk about the just transition, that's the number that we're working with, the 3.5 billion and 1.5 that don't have access to energy, which is critical to their survival. And so I think when it comes to philanthropy, this element of sort of thinking about our funding models as a support function to the people on the ground, the people that are living the daily experience of climate impacts is a critical component of that. And I think the other piece when it comes to innovative finance is essentially around the ecosystem that we're building. So again, thinking about what are the gaps that we hear from our communities and our partners that tell us, we need to be thinking about how youth can access funding. They're not able to access funding. What are the barriers? The barriers are simply they don't have access to the big funds of money that people are talking about. They are also marginalized. There are also people that people don't take very seriously, and that includes women, that includes indigenous peoples. So philanthropy's thinking about funding mechanisms and financing models are innovative, have to be very people-centered. And that doesn't mean that I'm sitting in London where I live and I go read a report and define what that means. That means I'm speaking to people who are telling me what their challenges are and what our role is to help them unpack that and help access that. I think one of the main challenges that we have seen is this element of, especially when you're talking about the pieces of like funding coming in from the global north to the so-called global south, there's a huge element of trust building. And I think this is where philanthropy comes in to really unpack that and help build the bridges, essentially. But I think another challenge that we need to really think about here is the point on adaptation, the point on mitigation, and how the reality is that for many communities, these two things mean the same thing in a lot of pieces, right? When we're talking about the energy transition, we were just talking about this before the panel, but in the context of Africa, how are we talking about an energy transition when we simply don't have energy to begin with? What does just mean for that, right? Who are we talking about? Who has access? And what forms of access do we have? And the solution, in my experience, is that really going down to the local communities and having them not just, be the people that are saying we need energy, but they're the people that are owning it, they're the people that are designing it, they're the people that are maintaining it, operationalizing it. So I think this is something that the world of philanthropy is trying to tap into a little bit more, and it needs to happen in parallel to the public finance piece as well. But the innovation really comes down to how people are defining it based on their experiences and their challenges of how they have been dealing with it on a day-to-day basis.
Thank you very much. I think I can share with that. Many youth groups have a challenge of accessing funding, mostly because they don't have the legal structures in place. But also setting up those legal structures is really complicated, especially when they are working in communities that limit their form of climate activism and action. I've had experiences where we try to register legally an organization for climate, and we tried for I think 2 years, close to 2 years, and we simply had to change the name because they couldn't accept one of the names that we are trying to register for climate. And it's hard to access funding when you don't have those legal structures. As you have said, trust-based funding might also mean the legal structures have to be in place for accountability and transparency. So I resonate with you on that. And I think our late Simon tomorrow coming is an activist in Tanzania. We are glad to have you here. And in your work, we have seen just transition being talked about. But also one of the things that is not talked about is the burdens that will come with a just transition. Because every form of development or every form of a transition, there's a form of burden that it comes with other people. And so to Simon tomorrow, how can we ensure that the burdens of the just transition are equally and equitably shared among our communities, from the local community to the global scale?
Thank you, Davis, for good questions. Actually, I can build my point from what my fellow panelists have said, that actually Africa, we need to have our own definition of just transitions. How global north are going to transit from dirty energy to clean energy is different from the context of African countries. And actually in African countries, our focus needs to be to those communities which are vulnerable. Because when you say community which are vulnerable, we mean that low-income households which depends on fossil fuel, and also workers who are working to the fossil fuel industries. These are a group of people who are going to be affected most by these transitions. So for us to have equal and equitable just transitions, we need to prioritize this to support these communities. And actually things that we need to do and things we need to raise our voice about them is that first we need to reskilling, because we are having workers, coal miners who are working to the fossil fuels. So we can try to imagine that ourselves that in a world that rather than having coal miners, we can train them so that we have solar panel technicians. And also, I had one say that actually it's hard to train a whole host new tricks, but I don't believe that saying. I believe that though it might be hard, but we can try to do that. Not all workers who are working on the fossil fuel industry can be transformed to work on the renewable energy industries. I believe there are some who can be retrained, there are some who can be upskilled and feed to the green economy industries. And those who actually cannot be trained or be upskilled, we can think of having social safety nets that will be there to accommodate those people who actually cannot be trained or be upskilled to fit in these industries. And also, actually, we need to investment, like how I say, because when we need to move to the green energy, we need to huge investments on the renewable energy, because we need jobs, because we are moving away from the fossil fuel industries. The people who are going to lose their jobs, so we need to create more green jobs. So we need to have more investment on this. And actually, in these investments of renewable energies, for it to be just, we need to include these communities. We need to include this indigenous community, especially these indigenous communities must be the one who are leading the way in these renewable energy projects, because they will be protecting their lands and also powering their nations at the same time. Another thing that actually we can do as African, we need to have reparations of the past harm, because there are those communities who are were affected by the past pollutions and environmental degradations. So this community must be considered when we are moving to these just transitions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And just to add on that, recently someone shared with me a project that we are working on, where they were teaching women in the local communities to install solar panels. And I think that is one of the ways of reskilling and not leaving the women again out in that just transition. I think that is good. And just to resonate on that as well, someone said that it's hard to have a just transition without including the workers, because if we are transitioning to a green economy, we need to think about where are they going to get food to eat, where are they going to get their money to eat. So I think the aspect of workers has to be really looked at as well, and to, as I've said, to reskill them so that they actually support the just transition and they are not opposing it. And I think that's where a lot of this will come in. You have had some work with sand workers in Canada and also the coal miners in the US. And I think you can share with us about the experiences that you had there and if there are any similarities with what is happening in the Congo Basin, because you understand that in the Congo Basin right now there is a lot of activity taking place in regards to the mineral extraction. And also you have done some work with the Christian Climate Observers Program, and you have a pastoral approach to that.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
I think that's probably going to be my best contribution. I'm happy to hear what you would have to say about what's happening in the Congo. But yeah, I think if I could say a few words about a faith-based approach to just transition. I know we don't all have faith-based backgrounds, but generally speaking, how many people have a church engagement? They've got a church that they're active in that they might mobilize for the sake of just transition, for the sake of climate action. Yeah, very good. Well, what role can the church play in, or faith leaders play, or even your own faith play? I think one of the roles it can play is in relation to this wonderful question, can you hear us yet? Can you hear us yet? And I see it there on the photo. There's a story from the Old Testament, and it's appropriate here in the United Arab Emirates that it involves the character of Ishmael. So Abraham and Sarah, the original patriarch and matriarch, Sarah had a servant named Hagar. And Hagar had a son named Ishmael through Abraham. And finally, when Sarah was able to conceive, she got very jealous of Hagar. And in fact, she began to torment Hagar. And finally, Hagar was kind of pushed out of the family and pushed into the desert. And in some ways became like the Bible's first refugee, in the sense of someone who's been pushed out because of conflict. And what she found in the desert was hardship, very little water, and impending death. And death for her son, Ishmael in particular. And there's a scene you can read in the book of Genesis where she'll actually take her son Ishmael and she puts him under a bush because she can no longer bear to see him die. Let him just die there, and I'll just stand over here. And she just sits down and weeps. And in some ways, that story is being played out time and again in this climate crisis, right? So many refugees, so many people, so many mothers, worried about their children, crying out for water and for sustenance. She's crying. God sends an angel. And then God's angel, his message to her is this: I see you. Can you hear us yet? There is someone who hears you. There is someone who hears us yet, and that is God. And in fact, he's giving me Nathan from the background. Yeah, there's a name that Hagar gives God, and it is this: the God who sees. The God who sees. And interestingly, the first person in the Bible who ever gives a name to God that's recorded in Scripture is a woman. And it's Hagar. And the name that she chose is God Sees Me. God Sees Me. So our churches and our pastors and our Christian leaders need, in the middle of this just transition, to say, we see you. We see the losses that you're experiencing. We see what you're afraid about. God sees you. So I think that's one role that they play. Another role that I think is played has to do with building the community. Because transition is just plain hard, right? For however much justice we build into it, it's not going to be easy. There will be a trade-off. But if we can tell people and encourage people, you don't have to do it alone. There can be a community that comes around you, and that and so any faith community, that's one of the functions, is to say, hey, we're headed into a tough time, but there's a good future ahead, but we're going to do it together. We're going to share the tough times together. And this would be the final thing I would say about the role of faith communities in just transition. And I'm going to introduce you to a theologian, a favorite of mine, named Walter Brueggemann. And Walter Brueggemann is a expert in these Old Testament prophets. So you think about Jeremiah and Isaiah, some of you who are familiar with these names. And Walter Brueggemann, he said, you know, we think of prophets as preachers, you know, we think of them up on the, you know, on the pulpit and they're saying, turn, you know, repent, whatever. Or we'll think of them as predictors, where they predict the future, you know, and somehow foretell the future. But what Walter Brueggemann says is, no, prophets are first and foremost poets. They give the voice, to the people's grief and the people's fear, and then they help them imagine what a good future can look like on the far side of the transition. And so one of the things he says, and this is very much applicable to climate change, whenever human beings encounter a harsh reality, something that they just don't want to go there, it's very normal, it's a natural human reaction to deny, to say, no, that can't be happening. The Israelites did it when they were told that they have to go into exile, and they say, no, that's never going to happen. You know, we have the temple, we have the law, we have whatever, that's not going to happen. And the prophets said, no, it is going to happen, but they raised denial. And what often happens is when we come to that denial with truth and we begin to pound on it, and there's actual scientific and sociological evidence to prove this, people will double down on their denial. They'll become even more defensive. So sometimes confronting with truth over and over again can shut people down. But grief can dissipate denial. You can actually cry away your denial. And so, you know, as faith leaders, as churches, but even just as friends with others, we can help people tell their story. What are you afraid of losing? What hurts? When you think about the future, what gives you the most concern? And just to get people talking and telling their stories. But we can't stop there, because despair is also an option. But here's where faith communities can come again into it, and where you can as well. Again, the name of Walter Brueggemann's book is called The Prophetic Imagination, because we can use our imagination and we can imagine a future that is good. Why? Because God is good and God will be in the future. Why? Because we have community and we can help each other get to the far side. And yeah, it's going to be tough. It's going to be tough. But there's resources in our faith, there's resources in our community, there's resources in the incredible knowledge and expertise that even this panel has. When I think of the just transition and where the church fits in, I think someone who comes alongside and says, hey, you don't have to do this alone, I'll walk with you. But that requires a commitment on our part, a willingness to actually show that degree of solidarity.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. And we are going to just turn to the audience in a couple of minutes to get any questions that may be written down in the course of the panel. But before we do that, I agree with you, and I think that climate spaces are beginning to understand that. I've seen the Faith Pavilion that has been set up. It's the first time that COP has had a Faith Pavilion, recognizing the element of faith. We have seen different faith communities working even before COP on the ground in these different areas, supporting climate refugees or climate migrants to adjust, to adapt to the climate impediments that have been brought about. So I strongly agree with that. And I think if there are any questions in the audience, we'll take one or two questions from the audience, and then we'll have some take-home messages from the panel. Any questions?
Thank you so much. I learned a lot from this panel. It was so interesting, definitely. Thank you. I have just something to post, like a small point, and then there will be a question. I've been interested with what you say about can you hear us? I'm from Congo, DRC, and we are French-speaking country. When I see in this room, I think I'm the only one from the French-speaking countries. While in Africa we have more than 20 French-speaking countries, and in these countries also they are facing a lot of problems in relation to climate change, deforestation, and so on. So, since they can speak English, and you can see your panel have been in English, people are watching in Instagram. French-speaking countries can't hear anything. So it looks like they are still in the backside. Can you imagine in Congo, we have the second biggest forest in the world, and we have several minerals which is important for the just transition. But since Congolese people can't be here when they are crying, I think things can be impossible. It can be impossible for the planet to do something to solve the question of climate change. So I think that one of other things we need to put on the table is to see how to break the language barrier. Uh, I try to do my best to teach myself English since last year because it was like impossible for me to see other countries are trying to do something about the climate change, but in my country it's a bit difficult. So if we can try to do something according to that, it can be better. There is people in Togo, Benin, Congo, Brazzaville, Congo, Kinshasa, Burundi who are speaking French. They need also to do something to address climate change. Thank you.
Let's give him some love. Thank you, Kalun. I think that that's really a point to note. And even in the work that we do, for example, back home, we have a project and we have a manual that we give for we install eco stoves. So there's a manual that we give and it's always in English. But we got to realize that actually the people in the local communities cannot read the English. So it also pushed us to create that manual in the local dialect. And not only that, even these other resources that can be got. And thank you very much for that input. Is there any other input from? Yes. You did.
Hello everyone. Thank you very much for the wonderful panel. So my question was going to you. I was inquiring, you've been talking about the trust-based funding. So in this crowd, we have so many youth that may be facing issues with accessing because they are doing things like grassroots work. What would be your advice to the youth in regards to that?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think we get asked that a lot, especially when we're talking not just about the youth, but also indigenous people and women as well at the front line of the climate crisis. I think, for me, it really comes down to the recognition that, in my view, a big part of the climate ecosystem is the movement itself. And I think you really need to take ownership of the fact that there is a movement around you that can give you access to things that you as an individual or you as a small youth organization may not have. I think our work with Rise Up is precisely that, is how do we work with organizations that we may have known by luck, and how do we make sure that in the way we're working with them, they're also empowering others in their community to be able to do what they need to do, and at some point, or through different ways of access, can also access the type of funding that they need. To be honest, the reality is that so long as we're talking about climate finance, and so long as we're acknowledging that a big part of this is coming from the global north down to the global south, there's consistently going to be big gaps in how people at the front lines are really accessing this. And I don't know what the saying is, but like the beauty is in the community, right? So you really need tap into your own network, your own peers that are doing great work. Again, I'm citing Rise Up because these are one of our partners. But to really think about how that network can give you access to things that seem too far away to reach. I just want to address the point on language. I'm Sudanese, and I don't even think, for many reasons, but I don't even think Sudan has a pavilion here. Probably not, because we have a war. But also, one of the biggest problems in Sudan is the fact that people don't really talk about climate change because the language that we use does not really get to the people that need to hear it, right? It's technical. Sometimes you hear that it's not a priority. Why would we be talking about climate change when I can barely think about how I'm going to eat today, let alone tomorrow? Right? And I think in addition to the literal translation, there's also a question of what is the narrative that we're using to talk to people about climate change and why it's pretty much in everything, like all the crises that we're facing come down to climate change. So I think it's two things, the literal language, but also the narrative piece, which I think you touched on very beautifully as well.
Okay, thank you so much. I didn't have any questions, but let me just give an input. So I love your ideas about faith and climate change. I'm a Christian too, and I believe most people here are believers. But when it comes to expression of faith, most people tend to shy away, but that is really a bold stand. And myself, I'm in touch now with the Vatican. We are trying to see how we can mobilize Christian groups across Africa and the global south to see that we can bring the faith into climate activism. Because when you look at throughout generations, faith has stood the test of time. So where there are trials and hardships, people, when they get back to God, you hear that things start moving. Just as we have said that God will be in the future, and God is always in the future. So when we have that belief and involve God in most of the works that we do, because He's the author of creation, so and we are fighting for a better life, a better planet. So when we put God into our practice, into institutions we are building, into projects that we are promoting across the world, I think we are on the right path. And then we have talked about a just transition. I believe also someone talked about we must define also what a just transition is, and I think this is very right, because most of the times when we come for COP, especially Africa, we come as beggars. You can even find that when Africa is trying to put their interests, they are conflicted with interests of bigger powers. But I also think that it is time we wake up, we open our eyes, and we start defining for ourselves what a just transition is. You have seen the operationalization of the loss and damage fund, but they are saying, according to what I saw, they are saying that it can only go to countries that have populations of less than 5 million. And when you come to my country like Uganda, we are almost approaching 50 million, but people are on the front line of the climate crisis. So these are some of the things that we need to do. Like other civilizations shouldn't be defining for us what a just transition is. We need to start defining for ourselves what climate change is and what a just transition is. And then she has talked about last time the issue of debt. And I believe this is a topic which should open our eyes. May I come from a country whereby I have to contribute over $500 every year into debt, servicing foreign debts, which my generation is not even responsible. I can't even develop, I can't invest into climate resilience projects because most of the money I try to work for, it is going back into debt servicing. So this is a bit unfair, and yet this crisis has been 97% caused by the global north and historical polluters. So I think the issue of debt is very huge on us, and it is something that all of us here must take up to and demand for that equitable transition even in the finance side. Thank you.
Let's clap for Regan and everyone else who has contributed. Thank you. And also maybe to add on the issue of a grassroots movement being able to acquire resources is to ensure, again, transparency and accountability. And that goes into how you report. Your reporting does a great deal to maintain donor relationships in case you want to continue to your work to be supported and to have impact on the grassroots level. I think that's also something that we as the youth and grassroots communities need to put more effort into. And if is there any other question? Yeah. So you have a comment? Yes, please.
Yeah, I also want to say that, for example, in my country, in Bolivia, not many people speak English. For me, it was very difficult to learn English and be here. And there are 34 nationalities, different nationalities, with their own native language. And how are they going to access all these funds and that have very bureaucratic processes in English? It's something that also it's something also that has to be solved. And the governments also have a big duty to offer more information about how to access what are the opportunities we have, because we don't know. There are many opportunities. I didn't know about, for example, your opportunity, but they are there. So they also have to close this bridge regarding information and also develop capabilities, because to prepare a good project, to be able to have this access to funds, you need to fulfill some requirements, technical, and also demonstrate the impact in climate change. So that is not easy, and that's something we also need to be prepared in our countries, and something not only at the governmental level, but also the people that wants to apply for this kind of to this kind of funding.
Thank you. Yes.
Thank you. I just wanted to add one more comment again because of the Congo context, which I think is absolutely critical. 60% of the world's cobalt is in Congo, and that is a big piece of what the world is calling a critical mineral, right? And critical for who is another question, and why, and etc., like big questions. But I think what I just wanted to end here when we're talking about a just transition is that this is a window of opportunity for Latin America, for Africa, for Asia to think about. We have been essentially victims of a very extractive industry that has really messed up how we live and breathe, and it messed up our people in the process. And this new transition that we're talking about, in my view, and this is why I'm so passionate about it, is that it's our opportunity to restart the clock and restart how we want to approach this new world order of what the transition looks like. So I just want to leave you all with the note that in 10 years' time, people around you, you might be the people that are sitting in the rooms of the negotiations, right? You're going to be leading these conversations. And so even though the funding is a big question and accessing finance is a big question, take advantage of your network, the people that you're surrounded by, and really try to think about how you can change this crazy system that we're in. Because if we're not doing it, we're going to be at COP 40? I don't know. Having the same conversation, which is why we're at COP 28 now. It's been 28 times we've been here, and we're still asking the same questions. So I just want to leave you with that. Just get excited, make noise, do what you're doing, and think about where you want to be in the next 10 years.
Thank you very much. One more? Okay.
From Simon.
Thank you so much for that point. Talking about minerals in Congo, there is a lot of big problems behind having the minerals in our country. Actually, 40,000 children below 18, below 15 are working in the mining seats right now instead of being at school. That is a great problem because those people from outside Congo are not only making green slab, but they are working also in the mines of those children. So that means that in the future, if nothing is done now, when we go in that side of Congo with a project according to renewable energy or something like that, those children can be able to become source of insecurity for people who need to work in that side, because they are growing with a bad mindset. So I'm trying to do something to see how to put them out of my mining seats and bring them back to school, because primary school is now free in Congo, but it's impossible by myself. I need your support. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Anyone wants to respond to that? Simon?
Okay, let me say something. On the issues of just transitions, what I believe that on just transitions, there's some benefits and also cost as well. So actually, we need these things to be distributed equally among all of us. And the science tells us the crisis and impacts which we're facing now, actually it's been caused with some actions that have happened many years ago. So even if we achieve maybe net zero today, it doesn't mean that actually we will not face this crisis or impacts again. For example, in our country right now, we are facing numbers of deaths due to flood. That's why our president have decided to leave to our countries because of floods in the Manyara regions in our country. So there is a discussion currently, mostly in African countries, that they believe that Africa cannot develop without exploring these fossil fuels. So I know African are polluted less compared to other countries, but in my thinking that I don't think this is an excuse for us to be polluters again, because currently we are demanding these polluters to pay for their actions which have done in the past. So in years to come, I think there are some people also that will be demanding from Africa to pay for the actions that we have done, which we are polluting right now. So I think it's not like a revenge thing that we need to do that because that there's a global north have polluted a lot. So it's our time now. It's our turn now to pollute. For the case of humanity, I don't think we as Africa, we need to go down to this road. We don't need to be polluters. So I think this is my point that we need to focus. It's not a must to shift abruptly from clean energy, but we need to accept and start a slow and swift transitions that is inclusive and safe for everyone. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the inputs, and looking at the time, I'll give an opportunity to the panel to just give us any last messages to take us through the new year, just within one statement or a sentence, and then we can close this amazing panel. No particular order. Can I start with you?
I agree with that. We have to define what is a just transition. We are trying to do that from a Latin American perspective, and it's important because we don't want this to deepen extractivism. We really need to move to another kind of development. We have to develop different areas of the economy, but with inclusiveness, creating new jobs for the people that is going to be displaced, guaranteeing access to funding, which is very important, and I really believe that we are running out of time. I don't want to give you the message that in 10 years you will be making the decisions, because I want all of us right now to try to do our best effort to change the pathway. We don't have time. We have until 2030 to reduce half of emissions, and we are not in that pathway. We are just increasing, and I don't know, I really believe in the power of people, the power of youth in the streets, with our demands, try to change in our countries, in these kind of spaces. So I really call all of you to keep fighting, to not be frustrated, to try to change the system, which is what we need.
Thank you very much.
Actually, I'll just say one sentence. Let's not repeat our past mistakes.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, I agree with everything that's been said. I think my main message is in the power of community and the beauty of community, and just, to your point, like, we need to work together to disrupt the existing systems. And so let's do that. Let's not work in silos. And let's, just think about defining the just transition, but also ensuring that in our own definitions, that is something that we're doing based on the feedback and the views and the perspectives of the people that are impacted by climate every day.
Thank you.
And I'll just look out over this crowd, and I'll maybe make some eye contact, and I'll say, God bless you, you belong here. And you have what it takes. And it is going to be hard, but you have what it takes. And look, you already have a community. So.
Thank you very much. Please let's applaud for our amazing panel. Thank you so much for the wisdom that you have shared and for the experiences that you have shared. I believe there was something to learn in here. I actually learned something new as well being on this panel. And I would just also love to thank Climate Life for giving us this space. Yes. A big thank you to Climate Life for providing us with this space to hold this event. And thank you to everyone as well for coming and sitting in here for the whole hour. That's really much appreciated. And I wish you a wonderful rest of the day. Thank you.